Here's some background before I get started. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with a place called Crybaby Bridge, but it is definitely a sight to see. Many people report driving across and seeing a woman in their back seat, finding a wet spot on their passenger seat, or if they get out, hearing the cries of a baby at night. I'm not sure of the whole history, but suffice it to say, a woman and her baby died on the bridge. That's all there is to know pertaining to this happening. Some friends and I were on summer break. I think it was going into my senior year in high school, and we had decided to go get drunk and check out this bridge. Needless to say, it wouldn't be that simple. First, we needed to find this place in bumfuck nowhere, as we lived about 3 hours away and none of us had ever been, and we needed to procure some alcohol. So once we had gone about getting our shit together and figuring out where we were going, we hit the road late that afternoon as we wanted to get there at dark. We ended up taking some back roads so we could start getting a good buzz going with little chance of cops seeing us. Some hours later and I was pretty ripped and we had reached our destination. Now as the story goes, if you want to see her in your back seat, you need to have an empty seat. But we were riding 5 deep and decided our best confirmation would be to hear the baby crying. So we parked off the side at one end and decided to walk on the bridge, which wasn't too unusual to see considering the reputation of the place. Now at some point I had decided to go and sit off the side of the bridge with my feet dangling off. Even though I was hammered, I remember what happened next pretty clearly, except for who I saw. As I sat there, who I thought was one of the girls who had come with us, came and sat next to me. I asked something along the lines of, "What's up?" She went on to answer back with how worried she was about her baby. I, being in an altered state, just replied, "Oh, wow, I didn't even know you had a kid." I went on for a few more minutes, telling her congrats and apologizing for not keeping up with her enough to even know. I told her I would be right back as I went to grab another beer from the car. As I'm approaching, everyone is sort of laughing and asking if I'm alright. I said drunkenly, "Yeah, I'm just super drunk." To which they asked, "So who are you talking to?" Let's say Lisa was the girl's name, which I said to them, and they all looked at each other, then over to Lisa, who was standing right there, then went on to say she'd been sitting right there the whole time. I hadn't even noticed in the dark, but lo and behold, here she was standing by the car. I looked back and to my horror, no one was there. As cliché as it sounds, at about that time we heard the faint cry of a baby. Understandably, we crowded into the car and gassed it. Though this isn't something so much scary, this is the closest to the supernatural or paranormal I've ever been. About 15 years ago, while trying to sleep with my now ex, who was next to me on a hot summer night, I was listening to the quiet yet annoying sound of the fan at the end of the bed. My son and stepdaughter slept in their own rooms. My boy was about 1 or 2 years old, and I think my stepdaughter was about 8 at the time. I kept listening to the fan's whispering sound as it moved from side to side. Something about it annoyed me more than usual. There was another sound behind the fan noise, kind of overlaid on top of it. I listened more intently, and then it was as if my mind made sense of what I was hearing. It was a long, drawn-out sentence, but really long as to be almost indecipherable. It said, "Peter, come out." I sprung out of bed, believing that there was danger in the house. I left the bedroom and I could see my stepdaughter sleeping in her room. It looked like she was sleeping on her back, with her mouth wide open like she was snoring or something. I then turned my attention to the other room where my son was sleeping. I checked to see if he was breathing okay, and he was. I still felt danger. I did a quick search of the house for an intruder. No intruder was there, but I still felt danger. I went back to where my stepdaughter was sleeping, and I saw that although I believed she was sleeping on her back, in fact, her chest was wedged between the wall and the bed, and with every breath, she was getting more wedged. I grabbed one leg and one arm and pulled her out. She sat upright with one eye open and one eye closed, breathing in short bursts very rapidly. I asked her if she was okay, and she nodded while still breathing very fast. I pulled the bed away from the wall and went back to bed. This time there was no feeling of danger, and I went back to sleep. The house at which we rented started as a 2-bedroom house. Work was done to make it a 3-bedroom house with me and my brother in the newer 3rd bedroom. The house itself was in the back of a long driveway. The property was so large that it could have that house next to the driveway, closer to the street. This meant that we frequently were friendly, or at least in contact with our neighbors. The one moving out that day, my mother says, was a witch, or to not offend technically inclined witches, some form of ritualist which we Christians tend to lump together. It also meant that we could loan her the extension cord when she asked for it to run from our house to theirs, since the electricity had been cut and the day was getting dark. She told my mother that she'd give her something in return. Since they were done, my mom was disappointed to find that she left without giving us any cash. The departed neighbor instead said we could have the lamps that she left behind, which my mother went to retrieve with my little brother that same night. Upon stepping into the neighbor's room, my mother's suspicions were confirmed in her mind. They saw a couple of idols, a Buddha, a statue of a sun and moon, and some other fetishes. What this meant to my mother, a woman accustomed to ghosts and encounters, was that these lamps were probably trouble. With that in mind, she began to clean our newly obtained but plenty dusty lamps. My mother had no problem holding conversations with such potentially problematic objects. "Little lamps, don't try to scare or haunt me. This is no place for demons." She continued talking with and praying over the lamps until they were clean, then got ready for bed with the daily routine of locking the doors, closing the windows, and laying down to sleep. Again, her suspicions were confirmed. If the oven door had been slammed open and slammed shut, its bang was what now rang throughout the house. My mother quickly got up and went to the living room where she was greeted by a strong, sulphurous odor. She continued to the kitchen to check to see if anything was broken. The strong odor intensified as if something was badly burnt. Even now, she can't exactly identify it, but she most closely describes the odor as sulfur. She looked at the oven, the dishes, the cupboard, the sink. Nothing was moved, nothing was broken. The oven door was as shut as she left it. My mother went back to the lamps annoyed. "Little lamps, don't continue scaring or haunting me, or else I'll throw you away." The next day, she asked if we heard any noises. We confirmed that we heard something like the windows rumbling, which is common when the wind is extremely strong. Apparently, the wind had been calm during that last night. She told me this over the phone today, and it actually jogged my forgotten memory. I remember my oldest brother's response in particular. He was living in the room where I've heard things myself at the time. He said it sounded as if someone loudly opened the oven door last night. When I was younger, my family, older sister, older brother, mother and father, lived in a tiny village in England. My dad was U.S. military, so we were stationed out there from when I was 8 until 12. This story is from the last week that I lived in England before moving back to the States. The small village I lived in was old. When I say old, I mean old. Some of the oldest graves in the church graveyard were from the 12th century. This village also had multiple large mansions. Creepy mansions. My dad's co-worker and wife also lived in the village and rented one of the large mansions. The mansion had a history, or rather folklore, because finding articles on what happened there are hard to come across. It's almost as if the time of when something horrific happened there is erased from the newspapers. In their house, there's an old bricked up entrance to the cellar. The bottom of the stairs had been bricked up, filled with dirt to the top of the stairs, and the floor then bricked over. The village story is that in the 18th century, the lord of the manor took all of his children, wife, and houseworkers into the basement and brutally killed them all. The crime scene was so bad that the bodies were removed, but the basement was bricked up because of how bad it was down there. That's just a little backstory. So, we are staying with our friends in their mansion the week before we moved back to the US. One night, my dad, mom, brother and friend and his wife are all hanging out downstairs playing board games. My sister had gone to bed early because she was feeling sick. Around 11 p.m., my sister comes down groggy and looking confused. She asked my dad why he had come upstairs and stood in the doorway to the guest room she was staying, and just stared at her. She said she woke up because she felt someone was watching her. We all told her that none of us had left to go upstairs. She described just a black figure in the door, so my dad and his friend freaked out and thought there was an intruder. They ran upstairs and checked every room as well as every room downstairs. They found nothing, and all doors and windows were locked. A little freaked out, everyone went to bed except me and my brother. My brother was a lot older than me and snuck outside to smoke cigs and meet up with his friends from the village. I stayed downstairs in the office room, which had a PlayStation, and started playing games. I should also mention the family had a large husky who was laying at my feet while I was playing games. I then heard a tapping on the wall, but the other side of this wall was where the entrance to the cellar used to be. So I tapped back. More tapping from the wall. So I checked the cellar entrance, and no one was in there. I thought maybe it would have been my brother fucking with me. So I go back, sit down, and resume my game. But the dog at this point was staring at the wall, whining. Then the tapping started again, but in a pattern. So I tapped a pattern, and it copied mine. By this point, the dog is really getting agitated, and I'm getting freaked out. More taps came. I tried one more pattern, and it copied the pattern again. I freaked out, scared shitless, and grabbed the dog, ran upstairs, and crawled into the other bed in the spare room my sister was in with the dog. I finally started drifting to sleep when the dog growled at the doorway. I looked at the doorway and saw the dark outline of a figure. It was there for a few seconds and then drifted away out of sight. My sister, who I thought was asleep, said, "Did you see that?" And I said, "Yes." So she crawled into my bed and we both held on to the dog and eventually fell asleep. We talk about the story till this day, and this happened in 2001, before 9/11. We're both in our late 20s, and it still freaks us out. If I can convince her to verify the story, I will have her do so. Hey everyone, Fear Fox here. I just wanted to give a couple shout outs real quick. First, I'd like to thank Blue Spooky, who did me the favor of answering a few questions after I made my first video and pointed me in the right direction. If you haven't watched any of his videos, you should go and check him out. I'll leave a link in the description. And I would also like to thank some friends who are helping make these stories possible. and helping better the quality of these videos. If there's anything you would like to hear, leave a comment and let me know. If you have your own story you'd like me to feature, I'll leave an email address down below that you can send them to. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button. And if you aren't already, feel free to subscribe. That's going to be all for today. I'm going to start uploading a minimum of 2 videos a week. So until next time, don't forget, fear is vigilance.